America wants peace now. After 18 months of funding, arming, and diplomatically shielding the most devastating military campaign the Middle East has seen in decades, after vetoing ceasefire resolution after ceasefire resolution at the UN Security Council, after watching the death toll climb past 40,000 and calling it complicated, after watching famine conditions emerge and hospitals get hit and journalists get killed and continuing to send weapons anyway, America is suddenly talking about deals, suddenly talking about negotiations, suddenly talking about getting this stopped. And I want you to understand something right at the beginning of this video, because it is the thing that changes how you interpret everything else I am going to tell you. The question is not whether this reversal is good news. The question, the only question that matters for anyone trying to understand what actually happens next, is why now? And the answer to that question is not what the American diplomatic establishment is saying publicly. It is something more uncomfortable, more consequential, and more revealing about the actual state of American power than anything you will hear from the State Department or from the White House press room. I have spent decades in military intelligence. I have watched superpowers navigate strategic failures. I have watched the gap between what powerful nations say about their position and what their actual operational posture reveals. And I am telling you right now, with everything I know from that career, that what we are watching is not a peace initiative. It is a strategic retreat dressed in diplomatic language. Stay with me through every minute of this video because by the end, I am going to walk you through exactly what Israel is actually planning, why the window that Israeli hawks believe they have right now is real and closing, and what happens to the entire global order depending on which decision Israel makes in the next 60 to 90 days. Let me start with why America reversed, because understanding the reversal is essential for understanding everything that follows. And the reversal has multiple layers that need to be separated and examined individually. The first layer is the most basic and the most uncomfortable, to say plainly, in Western media. America lost. Not militarily, not a single American soldier died in Gaza, but strategically, America lost badly. And I want to explain precisely what strategic defeat looks like when a superpower experiences it, because it does not look like tanks burning in the desert, and it does not look like a surrender ceremony on a battleship. Strategic defeat for a superpower looks like your credibility evaporating in front of the entire global South, while your official statements insist it is intact. It looks like the countries you need to build coalitions with, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Jordan, Egypt, Turkey, telling you quietly, and then not so quietly, that they cannot be publicly associated with your position. It looks like your Secretary of State flying to Riyadh and coming back with polite words and no substance. It looks like the Abraham Accords, the signature diplomatic achievement that American policy has been trying to expand, becoming politically radioactive across the Arab world. It looks like the International Criminal Court issuing arrest warrants for Israeli leaders and the United States, the country that has lectured the world about international law for 7 decades, being unable to stop it. Not unwilling, unable. That is what strategic defeat looks like, and Washington understood by late 2024 that it was in the middle of one. The second layer of the reversal is domestic American politics, and I want to address this directly because it touches on dynamics that analysts in the Western press are still tiptoeing around. The coalition fracture that happened over Gaza, Arab American voters in Michigan, young voters who grew up with social media and could see exactly what was happening in real time, Muslim communities in swing states that had been reliable Democratic constituencies. That fracture sent a signal that a certain category of electoral math had changed. Under the current Trump administration, The calculation is structurally different, but the underlying problem is similar. Trump needs the Arab states for the grand Middle East deal, the normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel that his first term set in motion but did not finish. And the people around him have told him clearly that you cannot get Saudi normalization while Gaza looks the way Gaza looks. So when America says it wants peace now, part of what it is saying is we need this stopped so we can get back to the actual project. The actual project is reshaping the Middle East in a way that contains Iran, integrates Israel into the regional economy, gives Saudi Arabia a security guarantee, and keeps China out of the picture. Gaza was supposed to be a tactical episode in that larger strategic restructuring. It became something else entirely, and now it is blocking the project itself. But if you think the American domestic political calculation is the most important part of this analysis, stay with me. Because what is happening in the divergence between American and Israeli strategic interests right now is where the genuinely dangerous territory begins. Here is the thing that most Western media commentary is still not saying clearly enough. And it is the thing that makes the current moment so much more unstable than the official diplomatic framework suggests. America and Israel do not want the same thing right now. They are allied. They are dependent on each other in ways that go deep into the architecture of American domestic politics and Israeli military capability. But in this specific moment, their strategic interests have diverged in a way that is operationally significant. America wants a deal that ends the active fighting, gets the hostages out, stabilizes Gaza under some form of international administration that is not Hamas governance and is not permanent Israeli military occupation, and creates the conditions for Saudi-Israel normalization. That is the prize Washington is working toward. Israel under the current government, and I want to be precise here because this is not about the Israeli people or about Israeli society as a whole. This is about the specific coalition that Netanyahu requires to maintain power. That government wants something different. The far-right coalition partners whose votes keep Netanyahu in office, whose budget allocations Netanyahu controls, whose support Netanyahu cannot afford to lose because losing it means losing the government, and losing the government means facing criminal proceedings on corruption and breach of trust charges in Israeli courts. Those partners openly advocate for the permanent Israeli resettlement of Gaza and the complete elimination of any Palestinian political entity west of the Jordan River. These are not fringe voices. These are cabinet ministers. And Netanyahu, as a man whose continued freedom from criminal prosecution depends on his continued hold on power, cannot make a deal that his far-right coalition partners see as a betrayal of the ultimate goals of this campaign. So what Netanyahu has been doing, and the pattern here is consistent enough that I think it demands direct analysis rather than charitable interpretation, is using the appearance of diplomatic engagement to buy time. He makes statements about being open to a deal. He sends negotiators to Qatar. He agrees in principle to frameworks. And then, at the critical moment when a deal seems genuinely close, something happens. A new military operation, an expansion into an area that was supposedly an evacuation zone, a condition added that the other side cannot accept. Each of these moments, examined carefully, came when a deal was getting close. Each of them made a deal impossible for weeks or months. The pattern is too consistent to be explained entirely by the inherent difficulty of negotiations. From an intelligence tradecraft standpoint, when you see a consistent pattern of behavior that produces a consistent outcome, regardless of stated intentions, you assess the behavior by its results rather than by the stated intentions. The result of Netanyahu's approach has been the continuation of the military campaign without a resolution. That result aligns with the political survival requirements of his coalition. That analysis does not require assuming evil intent. It requires reading the pattern. And if you think that pattern is the most alarming thing I am going to tell you in this video, most people switch off before this part. Don't be one of them, because what I need to tell you about Israel's current strategic assessment of the window it believes it has against Iran is where this entire situation becomes genuinely existential. Let me give you the Iran picture, because Iran is the reason everything else in this region is connected. And the conventional Western narrative about Iran, that it is a destabilizing force building toward nuclear capability that must be contained, leaves out the most important operational fact about Iran's current strategic position. Iran's deterrence network, the thing that protected it from direct Israeli or American military strikes for the last 2 decades, has been substantially degraded. I want to walk you through exactly how that happened, because the timeline and the sequence matter for understanding why the hawks in the Israeli security establishment believe they have a window right now that they have not had before. Iran's deterrence strategy was never about matching American or Israeli conventional military power directly. Iran could not do that. What Iran built instead was a ring of threats around Israel and around American assets in the region: Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, militias in Iraq and Syria, Hamas in Gaza, that functioned as a distributed deterrent. The message was, if you strike Iran directly, the cost is not just what happens inside Iran. The cost is what happens everywhere simultaneously. That strategy worked. It worked for years. It prevented an Israeli or American strike on Iranian nuclear facilities because the retaliation calculation was simply too expensive. And then, in the space of roughly 14 months between October 2023 and December 2024, that deterrent network was catastrophically degraded. Hamas launched the October 7th offensive and triggered an Israeli response so overwhelming that it destroyed Hamas as a functioning military and governing organization. The intelligence penetration of Hezbollah's communications, the pager attack, the systematic targeting of senior leadership, including Hassan Nasrallah himself, removed the most experienced and capable commanders that organization had built over decades. Lebanon entered a ceasefire arrangement that effectively ended Hezbollah's ability to operate as a state within a state in southern Lebanon in the short term. And then the Assad government in Syria collapsed with a speed that shocked every regional intelligence service, severing the land bridge Iran had used for years to supply Hezbollah. The proxy network that Iran spent 4 decades building and that protected it from direct military confrontation is right now in its weakest state in 20 years. And Israel knows this, and Iran knows that Israel knows this. Here is what I want you to understand about the strategic window that serious military and intelligence professionals inside Israel, not the settlers, not the religious nationalists, but the professionals who have spent careers thinking about existential threats to the Israeli state, believe they are looking at right now. The logic they are working from goes like this. Iran's air defense systems were degraded by Israeli strikes in October 2024. Iran's proxy network is in its weakest condition in 2 decades. Hezbollah is diminished. Hamas is destroyed. The Houthis are under sustained American military pressure. Iran cannot retaliate through its usual channels with anything approaching the force it could have projected 18 months ago. And if Iran retaliates directly, ballistic missiles at Israeli cities, it invites a response that could be genuinely existential for the Islamic Republic as a political system. So the argument being made in certain corridors of the Israeli security establishment is strike now. Strike the nuclear facilities at Fordow, at Natanz, at Isfahan. Set the program back by years. Do it while the proxy network is weak. Do it while there is an American administration that has demonstrated it will not fundamentally punish Israel for military action. Do it before Iran rebuilds. I want to be precise about what I am and am not saying here, because this is the kind of analysis that gets distorted in transmission. I am not saying this strike is going to happen tomorrow. I am not saying it is inevitable. There are serious people in Israel who believe this would be a catastrophic mistake, that it would unify Iranian society behind the regime, trigger a regional war that would cost Israel enormously, permanently poison Israel's relationships with the Arab states it needs, and would not actually destroy the nuclear program because the most critical elements are buried at depths that even Israeli ordnance cannot reach without American participation. But the pressure for this option is real, and the window, as the hawks see it, is closing, because Iran will rebuild its proxy network, because Hezbollah will reconstitute itself over years, because the political conditions in the United States will eventually shift, and because once Iran actually possesses a nuclear weapon, even a crude one, the deterrence calculus changes permanently in ways that no conventional military operation can reverse. Washington is hoping you don't connect these dots. Let me connect them for you right now, because the connection between the Israeli strike calculation and the American desire for a deal is not coincidental. It is the central structural tension of this entire moment. America's sudden desire for peace is not separate from Israel's strike calculation. They are directly connected. What Washington is trying to do at the highest levels of diplomatic and intelligence coordination is offer Israel an alternative to the strike that is attractive enough to take the strike option off the table. The normalization deal with Saudi Arabia, if it could be completed, would give Israel something it has wanted for decades: formal acceptance by the most powerful Arab state, economic integration into the Arab world, a security architecture in the region that treats Israel as a legitimate, permanent partner rather than an occupying power that will eventually be expelled. That prize, if it is real and if it is achievable, is the thing that Washington is using to try to persuade Israel that the diplomatic path serves Israeli long-term interests better than the military strike option. The problem is that the diplomatic path requires a Palestinian component that Netanyahu's current coalition cannot accept. And if the diplomatic path cannot be delivered because Netanyahu's political survival requirements make it impossible to deliver, then the strike option remains on the table. And if the strike happens, the normalization deal dies. Saudi Arabia cannot normalize with Israel the day after a strike on Iran, not in front of its own population, not in front of the Arab world, not in any political environment that currently exists or is foreseeable. So the entire American diplomatic project, the project that explains why America suddenly wants peace, is in a structural bind. It needs Netanyahu to make a deal that his coalition will not let him make in order to prevent a strike that will kill the deal that was the reason for wanting peace in the first place. That is not a stable equilibrium. That is a system under pressure. And systems under pressure either resolve or they break. Let me bring in the China dimension, because it is being systematically underweighted in almost all of the Western commentary on this situation. And from my background studying how great power competition actually operates, ignoring China's role here is like describing a chess game while ignoring the pieces on one side of the board. China's 2023 brokering of the Iran-Saudi Arabia normalization agreement was a signal. A deliberate, carefully calibrated signal that the Middle Eastern major powers were hedging, not abandoning America, not turning to China, but creating options for themselves. And every week that America's credibility suffers over Gaza, over the visible collapse of international law enforcement, over the gap between what Washington says about human rights and what it does when its allies are the ones violating them. Every week of that is a week that China's argument to the global South gets easier to make. China's argument is not that China is better than America. China's argument is that there is an alternative. Not necessarily a superior alternative, but an alternative. And the existence of a credible alternative changes the leverage calculations of every government in the region. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar. These are not countries that are turning toward Beijing. They are countries that are making sure Beijing knows they have options, which means they are making sure Washington knows they have options, which changes the terms on which Washington can demand their cooperation. China, meanwhile, is watching the Iran situation with specific and direct concern. The 25-year Strategic Cooperation Agreement between China and Iran, signed in 2021, China's purchase of Iranian oil that provides Tehran with economic oxygen, offsetting the sanctions regime. China's interest in not having American military dominance extend over the Persian Gulf in ways that affect Chinese energy security. All of these mean that a strike on Iran is not just an Israeli-Iranian bilateral issue from China's perspective. It is an issue that touches Chinese strategic interests directly. Beijing has communicated through diplomatic channels and through public statements that its position is don't. Whether that communication carries any actual deterrent weight with Israeli decision makers is a different question, and I think the honest answer is that it carries less weight than Beijing would like, because China has not demonstrated in this conflict that it is willing to impose real costs on Israeli behavior, and deterrence without demonstrated willingness to impose costs is just words. Now I want to address the hostage situation directly, because it is the human dimension of this analysis, and it cannot be reduced to political calculation alone. There are still Israeli hostages in Gaza. Families are waiting. People who were taken on October 7th, civilians, elderly people, children, are being held in conditions that are genuinely horrific and that represent one of the most prolonged hostage situations in modern history. I want to say this clearly and without qualification. These people matter. Their return matters. October 7th was an atrocity, and the people taken that day deserve to come home. What I also have to say, as someone who analyzes these situations professionally, is that the hostage issue has become simultaneously a genuine humanitarian imperative and a political instrument. And both of those things are true at the same time. The hostage families themselves, many of them, have said publicly that they believe Netanyahu is using their loved ones as a justification for continuing a war that serves his political survival rather than their return. They have protested in Tel Aviv. They have made these accusations directly. That is not anti-Israel analysis. That is what the hostage families are saying. And from an intelligence perspective, when you look at the pattern of negotiations, the moments when deals were close, the conditions that were suddenly added, the military operations that happened to make a deal impossible at exactly the wrong moments, the pattern supports rather than contradicts what the hostage families are saying. This is one of the most painful dimensions of this entire situation, because the genuine anguish is real, and the political manipulation of that anguish is also real, and both things exist simultaneously in the same space.